Welcome to this evening's special bibliotherapy live session, which is all about snowy literature. You can see that I have wrapped up warm with my woolly hat, ready for the snow, which will inevitably begin to fall as we speak tonight. I would love it if anyone who's here tonight could just give me a wave if they're on Instagram or a comment on the Facebook page, because I was having some technical issues earlier. So I'd love to know that I am successfully broadcasting. Welcome to people. I can see that there are many people here on Instagram. I haven't seen anyone on Facebook yet. So do say hello if you can. I'm going to read a poem by Robert Frost when I start and while we wait for people to join. And I'm hoping that there'll be people joining me here very soon. Welcome to people on Instagram. This is Robert Frost. The way a crow shook down on me, the dust of snow from a hemlock tree, has given my heart a change of mood and saved some part of a day I had rued. So that's a lovely poem to start off our evening from Robert Frost. Hello, Lorraine. Great to see you here. And thanks for commenting. I'm glad to see that I am successfully broadcasting this evening from my cozy little world. I'm imagining that there are soft, thick snowflakes falling down outside. And I hope that that's the experience that you'll all be having tonight while we talk about all the best literature full of snowdrifts, ice, and slush. So do send me any comments that you have about your favourite snowy literature. Quite a lot of people have been sending me their suggestions on Twitter, which is lovely, and I'm going to be bringing some of those in later this evening. But I'd like to start this evening by talking about one of my favourite snowy novels, which is Moominland Midwinter. This is Tove Jansson at her finest. It's a lovely book written for children, and it's all about one night when Moomintroll, who's one of the little creatures in these books, wakes up from his hibernation. He's meant to be asleep, and he should have been sleeping for the whole of the winter, because it's the tradition of the Moomins to go to sleep with their tummies full of pine needles and then not wake up till spring. So they completely miss the whole of winter and all of the snow. So most Moomintrolls never actually see snow. But in this book, little Moomintroll wakes up in the middle of the night, in the middle of the winter, when it's snowing outside, and he doesn't know what to do. I'm going to read you a little bit of this book because I think it's a great one to set the snowy scene for this evening. When he came back to the drawing room, the crystals in the ceiling greeted him with a melancholy jingle. "I'm off," Moomintroll said sternly to the chandelier. "I'm tired of you all, and I'm going south to meet Snufkin." He went to the front door and tried to open it, but it had frozen fast. He ran whining from window to window and tried them all, but they all stuck hard. And so the lonely Moomintroll rushed up to the attic, managed to lift the chimney sweep's hatch, and clambered out onto the roof. People that are joining now, I'm reading out from Moominland Midwinter, and Moomintroll is a little troll who's just woken up in the middle of the great night of winter. All his family are fast asleep with their tummies full of pine needles, and he is the only one that's woken up, and no Moomintroll has ever woken up before in the middle of winter. So it's a very strange thing to do. He lost his breath, slipped, and rolled over the edge. And so Moomintroll was helplessly thrown out in a strange and dangerous world and dropped up to his ears in the first snowdrift of his experience. It felt unpleasantly prickly to his velvet skin, but at the same time, his snout caught a new smell. It was a more serious smell than any he had felt before, and slightly frightening. But it made him wide awake and greatly interested. The valley was enveloped in a kind of grey twilight. It also wasn't green any longer, it was white. Everything that had once moved had become immobile. There were no living sounds. Everything angular was now rounded. "This is snow," Moomintroll whispered to himself. "I've heard about it from Mother, and it's called snow." Without Moomintroll knowing a thing about it, at that moment his velvet skin decided to start growing woollier. It decided to become, by and by, a coat of fur for winter use. That would take some time, but at least the decision was made, and that's always a good thing. Meanwhile, Moomintroll was laboriously plodding along through the snow. He went down to the river. It was the same river that used to scuttle, transparent and jolly, through Moomintroll's summer garden. Now it looked quite unlike itself. It was black and listless. It also belonged to this new world in which he didn't feel at home. I'll leave it there, but that gives you an idea of what it's like to be a Moomintroll waking up to discover snow for the first time. And I'm just going to read you a tiny bit more from nearer the end of the book, because I think Tove Jansson, who was Finnish, was one of the best people to write about snow ever. And she created a whole world of Moomins living in, well, mostly they're living in the summer, but they do have snowy adventures every now and then. This is towards the end of the book, when Moomintroll has begun to get used to his winter world. He felt more and more unburdened as he walked along. In the end, he was nearly exhilarated. He started to whistle and kick a lump of ice with great skill along his path. And then it slowly started to snow. It was the first snowfall since before New Year, and Moomintroll was greatly surprised. One flake after the other landed on his warm snout and melted away. He caught several in his paw to admire them for a fleeting moment. He looked towards the sky and saw them sinking down straight at him, more and more, softer and lighter than birds' down. "Oh, it's like this," thought Moomintroll. "I believed it simply formed on the ground somehow." The air was milder. There was nothing in sight except falling snow, and Moomintroll was caught by the same kind of excitement he used to feel at times when he was wading out for a swim. He threw off his bath gown and himself headlong into a snowdrift. "So that's winter," he thought. "You can even like it." And there's a picture of Moomintroll showing himself to the world, to the snow, and bathing in snow. I love the Moomintroll books, as you'll know if you've come to previous sessions that when I've talked about bibliotherapy, and I think that the Moomins are some of the best bibliotherapy for anyone at any time, definitely not just for children. And thank you, people who are joining in with that. Muddle Duck says Moomins are the best books ever. I couldn't agree more. They're great to read at any time. And the Moominland Midwinter and also Moomin Valley in November are both excellent books which capture the melancholy that we often feel in the winter. But also, Tove Jansson is brilliant at bringing joy into her snowy landscapes and into the Moomintroll world. So, two other books I want to mention by Tove Jansson are The True Deceiver and A Winter Book. So, The True Deceiver is a grown-up book written by Tove Jansson, which is all about an artist and another lady who lives in her village. The artist is called Anna, and Katri lives in the village too. Anna paints shockingly realistic portraits of the forest floor, and then weirdly animates them with unnatural looking flowery rabbits. And Anna lives in her parents' house, which is a huge kind of monument to the past, absolutely full of clutter. And the two women encounter each other and rub against each other in a not particularly positive way. So it is a very strange, wintry book, but as Tove Jansson does with her Moomintroll books, she is fantastic at describing snow, ice, and the weather. One of the strange and brilliant things that happens in this book is that Catri is a kind of accountant, and she starts helping this very dreamy artist, Anna, to sort out her life. And she takes her duties in terms of sorting out the artist's life to an extreme, which I'm now going to share with you, something rather shocking that she does. Here is the artist speaking. "But where is everything? How did you find the space?" "We didn't," Catri said. "We carried a lot of it out on the ice, and Liljeberg took the rest of it to the auction house in town. He'll bring you the money if they can sell it, though it probably won't be much." "Miss Kling," said Anna, "are you sure you haven't acted a bit high-handedly?" "Could be," Catri said, "but think about it, Miss Emelin. What if we had presented you with every piece of discarded furniture, every single one of those sad objects, all those meaningless things? You could have stood there and tried to decide what would be saved, or what would be thrown out or sold. Now everything's decided and settled. Isn't that good?" Anna was silent. "Probably," she said finally, "but all the same, it was very high-handed." Far out on the ice lay a dark pile of rubbish, waiting for the ice to break it up. A monument to Mama and Papa's complete inability ever to get rid of possessions. How remarkable, Anna thought. The ice will go, and everything will sink, just go straight down and disappear. It's bold. It's almost shameless. I have to tell Sylvia. Later it occurred to her that maybe it wouldn't sink, not all of it. Maybe it would float to another shore, and someone would find it and wonder where it came from and why. In any event, it was not even the least bit Anna's fault. So I love that scene, and I love that idea of putting all your annoying possessions that you can't decide what to do with out on the ice. If only we could all do that, and then just let it sink down into the water. What a great solution, but not very good for the environment, let's face it, and clearly not recommended. However, in The True Deceiver, it's a great solution, and I do love that idea. Tove Jansson also wrote this lovely book, a winter book, which in a way is a great companion to her other lovely book called A Summer Book. This one is a collection of short stories, which are all very much autobiographical and based on anecdotes and memories from Tove Jansson's childhood when she was living in Finland. And again, they very much dwell on snow and the effects of snow on humans. And I'd love to read you a little passage from one of these stories because it relates so perfectly to the Moomintroll passage that I read you earlier. And I think it's a really great insight into how Tove actually invented the Moomins in the first place. "I was building with the cushions on the sofa, and sometimes I looked at my mother through a peephole between them. She felt me looking and asked, 'Are you all right?' while she went on drawing. And I answered, 'Of course.'" Her mother was an artist, which is not a surprise as Tove was herself. "Then I crept on hands and knees into the end room and climbed onto a chair and saw how the snow was sinking down over me. Now the whole horizon had crept below the edge of the world. The fringe of forest couldn't be seen any longer. It had slid over. The world had capsized. It was turning over quietly, a little bit every day. The very thought of it made me feel giddy. Slowly, slowly, the world was turning, heavy with snow. The trees and houses were no longer upright. They were slanting. Soon it would be difficult to walk straight. All the people on earth would have to creep. If they had forgotten to fasten their windows, they would burst open. The doors would burst open. The water barrels would fall over and begin to roll over the endless field and out over the edge of the world. The whole world was full of things rolling, slithering, and falling. Big things rumbled. You could hear them far off, and you had to work out where they would come and get away from them. Here they were, rumbling past, leaping in the snow when the angle was too great, and finally falling into space. Small houses without cellars broke loose and whirled away. The snow stopped falling downwards. It flew horizontally. It fell upwards and disappeared. Everything that couldn't hold on tight rolled out into space, and slowly the sky went dark and turned black. We crept under the furniture between the windows, taking care not to tread on the glass. But from time to time a picture or a lamp bracket fell and smashed the window pane. The house groaned and the plaster came loose. And outside, large heavy objects rumbled past, rolling right through the whole of Finland, all the way down from the Arctic Circle. And they were even heavier because they had collected so much snow as they rolled, and sometimes people fell past, screaming all the time. Next morning, the daylight was green, underwater lighting throughout the room. Mummy was asleep. I got up and opened the door and saw that the lamps were on in all the rooms, although it was morning, and the green light came through the snow which covered the windows all the way up. See, this is very much like Moomintroll waking up in his house when all the rest of his family is sound asleep. The house was a single enormous snowdrift, and the surface of the ground was somewhere high up above the roof. Soon the trees would creep down into the snow until only their tops stuck out, and then the tops would disappear too, and everything would level itself off and be flat. I could see it. I knew. Not even praying would stop it. I became very solemn and quite calm and sat down on the carpet in front of the blazing fire. I won't go on because I've got so many lovely books to talk about this evening, but I love the way in this story the young Tove Jansson ends up having absolute hysterics with her mother as they give up everything, realizing that they're trapped in the snow, and they allow themselves to just cuddle under the sofa and do lots of craft and art, just like the Moomintrolls would do if they were stuck in the snow. So I love Tove Jansson, and I think all of her books are really excellent bibliotherapy, particularly at this time of year when we're all staying inside and keeping ourselves away from the cold as much as possible. Now, while we're in Scandinavia, I'd like to have a look at a Norwegian book called The Ice Palace, published in 1963. This is a book written by Tarjei Vassas, and he wrote 25 novels, was nominated 35 times for the Nobel Prize, but never actually won it. And this is his most famous book. As you can see, the actual book itself is very beautiful, and it's full of some of the most sublime prose that I've ever read, describing snow and ice. This is translated from the Norwegian, but it's a fantastically wonderful translation. It's the story of two young girls called Sis and Un, and they're both around the age of 11. They establish a very strong bond with each other, and it's a very mysterious and strange book, which one doesn't really know exactly what it's all about in some ways, but we do know that it's very much about grief, loss, and sadness, because Un, at the very beginning of the book, has lost her mother. She comes to stay in a tiny little hamlet on a mountain in the middle of nowhere in Norway with her aunt, who she's never previously met. And she comes to school with Sis, and Sis immediately becomes completely obsessed with her in a strange way, and they become fast friends. But they also have this very strange adventure involving the Ice Palace. And the Ice Palace is a creation of nature which is made by a waterfall freezing over time, and the water keeps tumbling down over the ice cliff and freezing more and more until it's a highly intricate cathedral-esque ice palace. And Un decides to go and visit this ice palace on her own when she should have waited for the school trip to take her there with all of her friends. And I won't tell you what happens, but it is a mysterious and tragic book. I'll read you a bit to give you a description of the Ice Palace. The roar was suddenly stronger. The river began to quicken its speed, flowing in yellow channels. Un ran down the slope alongside, in a silvered confusion of heather and grass tussocks, an occasional tree among them. The roar was stronger. Thick whirls of spray rose up abruptly in front of her. She was at the top of the falls. She stopped short as if about to fall over the edge. So abruptly did it appear. Two waves went through her. First, the paralysing cold, then the reviving warmth. As happens on great occasions. Any of you who are ice cold water swimmers will know exactly how that feels. And I know there's a lot of you out there, people that like to go swimming in the freezing sea in the mornings. Un was there for the first time. No one had asked her to come here with them during the summer. Auntie had mentioned that there was a waterfall, no more. There had been no discussion of it until now, in the late autumn at school, after the Ice Palace had come and was worth seeing. And what was this? It must be the Ice Palace. The sun had suddenly disappeared. There was a ravine with steep sides. The sun would perhaps reach into it later, but now it was in ice-cold shadow. Un looked down into an enchanted world of small pinnacles, gables, frosted domes, soft curves, and confused tracery. All of it was ice, and the water spurted between, building it up continually. Branches of the waterfall had been diverted and rushed into new channels, creating new forms. Everything shone. The sun had not yet come, but it shone ice blue and green of itself and deathly cold. The waterfall plunged into the middle of it as if diving into a black cellar. Up on the edge of the rock, the water spread out in stripes, the colour changing from black to green, from green to yellow and white, as the fall became wilder. A booming came from the cellar hole where the water dashed itself into white foam against the stones at the bottom. Huge puffs of mist rose into the air. Un began to shout for joy. It was drowned in the surge and din, just as her warm clouds of breath were swallowed up by the cold spume. It's a really gripping book. It's very short, and it's a book which I would say is actually a great gift, all about snow and ice. It's a fantastic book to read in the winter, but it is also a sad book, so not necessarily for the faint-hearted. It does have this strange and mysterious tragedy at its heart. I'm going to read you another tiny extract to give you a bit more of an idea of where it's coming from. This is a poem from the middle of the book called A Dream of Snow-Covered Bridges. As we stand, the snow falls thicker. Your sleeve turns white. My sleeve turns white. They move between us like snow-covered bridges. But snow-covered bridges are frozen. In here is living warmth. Your arm is warm beneath the snow and a welcome weight on mine. It snows and snows upon silent bridges, bridges unknown to all. So what are those silent bridges? This is also a love story, and it's a story about getting over love, and it's a story about loss. I would very much recommend it. And it's actually a great one to read if you are feeling a bit melancholy, because it echoes your own melancholy. It's also a book that many people have raved about, such as Doris Lessing, and I'm just going to read you what she said about it. How simple this novel is, how subtle, how strong, how unlike any other. It is unique, it is unforgettable, it is extraordinary. So there you go, that's The Ice Palace. And as I was mentioning earlier on Twitter, I've got 3 copies of this book in my house, and I'm giving one away tonight to anyone that retweeted my tweet about this evening. I'm going to choose someone randomly at the end of the evening and pass on and send whoever it is the lucky winner one of a copy of that book. Another beautiful book, which is amazingly poetic about snow, is this gorgeous, tiny, lovely book, which is also fantastic as a gift, being beautiful, small, and very romantic. It's by Maxence Fermin, who is a French writer, and it is translated from the French. It's the story of Yuko Akita, who had 2 passions, haiku and snow. It's about Yuko, who his father was a Shinto monk, and he lived in the north of Japan where the winters are long and hard. Yuko wants to become a poet, but his father says poetry is not a profession, it's a way of passing the time. He says poems are like water, like this river that they're walking along when they're having that conversation. And Yuko says, that's what I want to do, to watch the passing of time. And Yuko does become a poet of snow. It's a really gorgeous book which has a story within a story. And I'll just read you a couple of bits of it to give you an idea of quite how lovely it is. The first page here. Yuko Akita had 2 passions, haiku and snow. A haiku is a Japanese poem. It has 3 lines and only 17 syllables, no more, no less. Snow is a poem that falls from the clouds in delicate white flakes, a poem that comes from the sky. It has a name of dazzling whiteness, snow. I must say that this book is one of the most lovely books to read in terms of thinking about ways of describing snow. So it is irresistible that I have to read you a little bit more from the book, because this is the one that you can turn to for the most lovely descriptions of snow. Snow is a poem of dazzling whiteness. In January, it covers the north of Japan. There, where Yuko lived, snow was the poem of winter. In the first days of January 1885, despite the wishes of his father, Yuko began his career as a poet. He wrote with only one purpose in mind, to celebrate the beauty of snow. He had found his way, and its beauty would never cease to enchant him. In the days of snow, he would leave the house in the early morning and begin walking towards the mountain. He always went to the same place to compose his poems. He sat down, legs crossed, beneath a tree, and he stayed like this for hours and hours, pondering in silence the 17 most beautiful syllables in the world. Then, when finally he felt he had a poem, he would write it on silk paper. Every day, a new poem, a new inspiration, a new sheet of silk. Every day, a different landscape, a different light, but always haiku and snow until nightfall. Then he would return for the tea ceremony. Then I'm just going to give you a little bit more of his ponderings about snow, but it may sound like it's a book that's just very slow and ponderous and thoughtful and delicate, But actually, it also has this very exciting and dramatic love story within it, relating to a trapeze artist woman who he falls in love with, whose only desire is to fly or to remain up in the sky on her on her tightrope. Sorry, she's not a trapeze artist, she's a tightrope walker, and all she wants to do is hang suspended in the air like a snowflake. There are 5 things you can say about snow. It is white, it freezes nature and covers it, it is always changing, it is slippery, it turns itself into water. But Yuko's father had nothing good to say about snow. For him, this strange passion his son had developed was making the winter seem even more hostile. It is white, so it is invisible and does not deserve to exist. It freezes nature and covers it. Such arrogance, to turn a living thing into a statue of ice. It is always changing. Well then, it can't be trusted. It's slippery, and who enjoys slipping over in the snow? It turns itself into water, true, and then it floods us during the thaw. Yuko, on the other hand, saw 5 different characteristics, and each appealed to a different aspect of his artistic nature. It is white, like a poem of great purity. It freezes nature and covers it, making every landscape a painting. It is always changing, like a piece of calligraphy, for there are 10,000 ways to shape the word snow. It is slippery, so it is a dance, for in the snow we all become dancers, keeping our balance like tightrope walkers. It turns itself into water, therefore it is music, for in the springtime it turns rivers and streams into symphonies of white flowing notes. So it is all of this to you, asked the monk, and much more. That night, Yuko's father realized that haiku alone would not be enough to fill the eyes of his son with the beauty of snow. So that's Snow by Maxence Vermine, a lovely book, very much one I would say that's great to give someone as a present. It is a book that brings joy, and it's actually a very upbeat, positive book, even though it does have tragedy in the middle of it. But it is a very lovely book, and it's very much like a delicate snowflake in every way. Now I want to move on to Miss Smilla's Feeling for Snow, which is a book that quite a few people mentioned when I put it out to the world of which are your favourite books about snow. This was a book written by Peter Hurg in 1992, and it was then a real sensation, selling millions of copies around the world and being translated into 17 languages. Peter Hurg is a Danish writer who also wrote one of my other favourite books, The Woman and the Ape, which is a very different kind of book, not a thriller, and set partly in London, involving a woman and an ape having an intriguingly bizarre relationship. However, Miss Smilla's Feeling for Snow is a book all about a young woman in her mid-30s who is conducting an investigation into the death of her young neighbour, Isaac. When the boy falls from the roof of their apartment building in Copenhagen, something about his footprints in the snow that lead to the edge of the roof from which he fell causes Smilla to reject the police's verdict of accidental death. So Smilla, who is herself a remarkably intriguing character, who is half Inuit and half Danish, has an amazing understanding of snow, and she has actually dedicated her life to the study of snow and glaciers, and so she is actually a world expert on this phenomenon. and she realizes that something strange and weird is afoot when she discovers the body of this young boy who she also happened to have a strong relationship with because he came from an abusive background and she had befriended him. So she knows that there's something very odd going on. And indeed, Isaac, the boy that died, has a terrible fear of heights. So he would never voluntarily have gone up onto the roof of that building and fallen off it. She realizes that he can't have fallen off it. But there are no other tracks in the snow at the top of this building. So it seems that he has just run off the edge of the building voluntarily. Why would he do that? So Miss Smilla goes off on an amazing quest, which takes her to Greenland, and it takes you under the sea, it takes you under glaciers. It's all incredibly exciting. And I know a lot of people that read this book in the 90s absolutely loved it, and it was one of their favourite books at the time. It is, in a way, quite an intellectual seeming book at times because it goes into quite a lot of scientific analysis of snow, freezing temperatures, glaciers, and how snow works. But that's one of the things that make it so compelling because we feel like we are in the hands of an expert. I'll read you a little bit of it so that you can get a feeling of Miss Smilla's feeling for snow. There are reasons for moving in and reasons for staying on. With time, the water has become important to me. The white cells are located right on the harbour. This winter, I have been able to watch the ice forming. The frost set in November. I have respect for the Danish winter. The cold, not what is measured on a thermometer, but what you can actually feel, depends more on the force of the wind and the relative humidity in the air than on the actual temperature. I have been colder in Denmark than I ever was in Thule. When the first clammy rain showers began slapping me and November in the face with a wet towel, I met them with fur-lined capuchins, black alpaca leggings, a long Scottish skirt, a sweater, and a black waterproof cape. The temperature then starts to drop. At a certain point, the surface of the sea reaches minus 1.8 degrees. Who wants to go swimming in that, I ask you? And the first ice crystals form, a temporary membrane that the wind and waves break up into fragile ice. This is kneaded together into the soapy mash called porridge ice, which gradually forms free floating plates, pancake ice, which, one cold moon day hour on a Sunday, freezes into a single solid sheet. As it gets colder, and I'm happy because I know that now the frost has gained momentum, now the ice will stay, now the crystals have formed bridges and enclosed the salt water in pockets that have a structure like the veins of a tree, through which the liquid slowly creeps, which not many of those who look across towards Holman think about, but which is one reason for believing that ice and life are related in several ways. So Miss Smilla's feeling for snow, that's a great, exciting, gripping detective novel. And thinking about ice, I now want to mention The Snow Child by Eowyn Ivey, which starts off with a very dramatic moment where the heroine walks across an icy river because she wants to kill herself. By the way, thanks for mentioning, Patricia, that Miss Smilla has a great adaptation as a film, which I haven't seen myself, but I would really like to see. And it apparently is brilliant. I have heard that. So Miss Smilla is great to both read and watch as a film. But getting back to The Snow Child, this is set in Alaska, and it tells the story of a couple, Jack and Mabel, who are childless, and they're slowly drifting apart because there's so much pressure on them in 1920 to have children, and the fact that they haven't managed to produce them is slowly tearing them apart and making Mabel incredibly depressed. So at the very beginning of the book, she's walking across this river, willing the ice to crack so that she will fall into it and drown. She miraculously doesn't fall through the ice, so she decides to go on living. And one night, she and her husband spontaneously create a little snow child out of snow, and they decorate it very beautifully. Oh, Sam, you're saying that I've disappeared. That's worrying. I hope I haven't disappeared for other people. Anyone that's still here, send me a comment to tell me that the technology is still working. I think Instagram is still good, but I hope that Facebook is bearing up. Anyway, Jack and Mabel, they are this very sad couple. They create this snow child one evening in a spirit of fun, and it's a moment where Mabel seems to rediscover the love of her husband, which has been slightly waning, it has to be said, under the pressure of living in their bleak homestead in the middle of Alaska. Lorraine, thanks for telling me you can still see and hear me. That's good. It's all going well. So in Alaska, bleakness, middle of nowhere, they've created a snow child out of snow. They go to bed. In the morning, the snow child has disappeared and been kicked around and possibly melted, but the scarf and gloves that it was wearing have also disappeared. And Jack sees skittering in the distance, and we slowly realise that there is a real girl out there in the woods. We then wonder for the next couple of hundred pages whether this child is a real child or whether she was created by their act of wishing for a child and creating a child out of snow. It is a really lovely, beautiful story based on the old fairy tale about the snow child. And it is sad and haunting and very beautiful and very evocative about the snow. The whole book takes place in pretty epic depths of winter, and I won't tell you the plot because you should definitely read it for yourselves if you don't know it. It is another great one. I'd say give it to someone as a Christmas present or buy it for yourself. It is sad, but it's also very compelling, very haunting, magical, intriguing, mysterious, and like a fairy tale. But it also does have elements of seeming to be more real than a fairy tale might want to be. I'll read you a tiny passage from it. Jack brought his head up from the basin and wiped his face with the towel. What is it? The window. Do you see? As they watched, thick frost unfurled in feathers and swirls across the glass, slowly spreading from the centre towards the corners. Lacy white vines grew in twists and loops, and icy flowers blossomed. Within seconds, the window that had been clear glass was covered in patterns of overlaying frost, like fine etching. Maybe it's from the steam, Mabel said in a near whisper. She pressed the palm of her hand against the glass, and her warm skin melted in the ice. She curled a fist, rubbed a small circle in the centre of the window, and looked through. Oh! Oh! She gasped and leaned closer. What, Mabel? What is it? It's her. She turned her hand at her throat. Her little face right there in our window. She had fur all round her head, like a wild animal. It's her hat, her marten hat, with the flaps tied under her chin. But she's there now. Go look. She runs fast, even on the snow, he said, but Mabel was handing him his boots and coat and opening the door. When he stepped outside, his wet beard and hair stiffened with ice. He walked around the side of the cabin, but saw only what he expected: snow and trees and night. The child was gone. So that is a very lovely fairy tale type book, which I think you would all love, and it's very magical. Moving back to murder mysteries, of which there are quite a lot in the world of snow, Snow Falling on Cedars by David Guterson must get a mention, which is another book that's been adapted and made into a film. And I haven't seen the film, but the book itself is great. I can strongly recommend it, which is all about a fictional island called San Pedro Island, located off the coast of mainland Washington in the Pacific Northwest. And it's about a Japanese American fisherman named Kabuo Miyamoto, who goes on trial for the murder of Carl Hine, who's a well-liked local fisherman. And this book is all very much about the racism between the Japanese who've settled in this little island in America and the local people who've lived there for many years previous to the Japanese who settled there. And although this is fictional, it's clearly based on elements of truth with the Japanese settlers. And it is a really romantic, sad, and compelling book. And it is a kind of murder mystery, but it's also, in a way, a romance between one of the local guys called Ishmael and a Japanese girl. And it talks about how they used to meet and have trysts in the middle of a cedar tree, which was hollowed out. And it's a book which does have many beautiful passages in which the snow is falling gently on the cedars. It does have a great melancholy to it, but it is a book that I would highly recommend. It's a gripping one, and it has a different flavour of snow to some of the other snowy books we've been talking about tonight. I think Miss Smilla has this wonderful scientific approach to snow, whereas Snow Falling on Cedars has a much more poetic and melancholy approach to snow. I must mention The Call of the Wild by Jack London, which is one of the first books that I ever read involving heavy drifts of snow. It was written in 1903 and it still totally holds up as a brilliant read. I would highly recommend it to everyone. It's a great book to give to kids because it's a survival tale. It's told through the eyes of a dog. It's not actually in the dog's voice, but it's very much through his perception. And the dog is called Buck. He is half St. Bernard, half sheepdog. And he starts off living a very lovely, pampered life in California. But he gets his life turned upside down when he's kidnapped and taken to the exotic wilds of the Alaskan Yukon in the 1890s. So this is another Alaskan book. I'm going to read you a tiny bit, which is the bit that I remember most about the book and pertaining to snow, because it's one of those magical things that you discover as a child, which seems like a complete revelation. This is when Buck has been taken and he's being turned into a sled dog, having previously been very much a pet. Finally, an idea came to him. He would return and see how his own teammates were making out. He's just spent the last few hours trying to find somewhere to go to sleep and being far too cold to curl up anywhere. To his astonishment, they had disappeared. Again, he wandered about through the great camp, looking for them, and again he returned. Were they in the tent? No, they could not be, else he would not have been driven out. Then where could they possibly be? With drooping tail and shivering body, very forlorn indeed, he aimlessly circled the tent. Suddenly the snow gave way beneath his forelegs, and he sank down. Something wriggled under his feet. He sprang back, bristling and snarling, fearful of the unseen and unknown. But a friendly little yelp reassured him, and he went back to investigate. A whiff of warm air ascended to his nostrils, and there, curled up under the snow in a snug ball, lay Billy. He whined placatingly, squirmed and wriggled to show his goodwill and intentions, and even ventured, as a bribe for peace, to lick Buck's face with his warm, wet tongue. Another lesson. So that was the way they did it, eh? Buck confidently selected a spot and with much fuss and waste effort proceeded to dig a hole for himself. In a trice, the heat from his body filled the confined space, and he was asleep. The day had been long and arduous, and he slept soundly and comfortably, though he growled and barked and wrestled with bad dreams. Nor did he open his eyes till roused by the noises of the waking camp. So that is a lovely little moment in The Call of the Wild when we discover through Buck that you can create a little cave to go to sleep in the snow. And that means that you will be warm all evening, all night. That's what we do if we're stuck in a snowdrift. So Call of the Wild, that's another fantastic book that you should all read. And it's got a more, in a way, practical approach to snow than some of the other books that I've been talking about. We get poetry in snow. We have science in snow in Miss Smilla, and we have a kind of fairy tale approach in The Snow Child, and then we have the wintry finish approach in Tove Jansson and the Moomins. I just want to mention this lovely book as well, which is called Advent by Jane Fraser, which is a book describing the homecoming of a girl returning to the Gower in, I'm not quite sure the date, but it's early 20th century, maybe 1905. And she comes back to see her ailing father. And this is a tale of bleak farming life, but it has a really fantastic scene in the snow, which I was extremely moved by and was very much biting my nails when I came to that moment, and I don't want to give it away. It's a book that's only just come out. It's called Advent, so it's a good book to be reading now, and it's set in Wales in the Gower, and it does have a fantastic snowy scene. There are many snowy scenes in novels which I will not have time to talk about. Let's just pass this one by the screen. I don't really need to tell you about it. The Shining, I'm sure most of you know many from the film, but it's actually an excellent read as well, and it does have some of the spookiest snow scenes that I've ever read. There were also many books that came up that you brilliantly mentioned when you were talking to me on Twitter earlier, some of you. And I want to mention some of those, which are ones which I won't have time to go into detail about, but they're great to know about. So 100 Million Years in a Day by Jean-Baptiste Andrea, a French author, set in 1954, which is it's a novel about a scientist who's been fascinated by fossils for his whole life, and he goes in search of what he calls a dinosaur in the Dolomites. And this book is incredibly beautiful, jewel-like prose, and it's absolutely gripping and brilliant. There's also Annie Proulx's Bark Skins, which is a collection of stories. And in one of those stories, there's a boat which becomes overcome by ice on one of the Great Lakes, which also reminds me of The True Deceiver by Tove Jansson with the ice melting. And that would be a fantastic snowy book too. Then there's 12 Nights by Urs Fayes, a Swiss writer, translated by Jamie Lee Searle, which is a gloriously snow-laden book. I don't have the actual book yet. I'm hoping to get it for my next week's session, which will be on my Facebook Live, which will be all about Christmas stories. So join me for that when I will be talking about many books relating to Christmas, including this one, because this also relates to the 12 Nights of Christmas. A more frivolous read, which also looks fantastic and I haven't read yet myself, is The Chalet by Catherine Cooper, and that was tweeted to me. It does sound like a really fun read, I have to say, in which a couple have booked a luxury chalet in the French Alps and they're hoping to impress their potential clients there. But during the week, a body is found of someone who went missing 20 years ago. So this is a kind of thriller which looks like a really fun read, and it might be a way of vicariously going on a exciting skiing holiday for anyone that is missing that possibility this year. Another one that came up on Twitter, which was mentioned by one of the followers of the salon, is The Sorrow of Angels by John Kelman Stephenson, which is part of an Icelandic trilogy, which I haven't read yet, and it sounds absolutely brilliant. And it was described as being pure, continuous snow. I think it's a large part of the book is a journey, a late winter journey through heavy snow and bad weather, all set in Iceland. And that sounds absolutely brilliant. Josh Lacey mentioned The Worst Journey in the World by Apsley Cherry Gerard, which also sounds like a brilliant read, in which it's the gripping account of an expedition gone disastrously wrong. One of the youngest members of Scott's team, Apsley Cherry Gerard, was later part of the rescue party that found the frozen bodies of Scott and the three men who'd accompanied him on his final push to get to the pole. So that would also be a brilliant read, which is non-fiction. Thank you, Patricia, for mentioning The Tenderness of Wolves by Steph Penny, which is also a fantastic book. So we do have an amazing number of brilliant snowy books to share, and I'd love you to keep on sending me any further suggestions. I'd also love to mention that the last episode of the Big Scottish Book Club with Damien as your amazing presenter is this Sunday, with guests Jojo Moyes, Dustin Lance Black and Kirsten Innes, who are discussing the pure Gallus characters at the heart of their books. So that's this Sunday at 10 p.m, I do believe, the Big Scottish Book Club. And I've been watching all of those and loving them. They're also available on iPlayer if you don't see them at the time. And also, you can buy yourself a gift or give someone in your family the gift of Salon on Demand for only £5. You can buy eternal access for all the previous Salon episodes on YouTube. So you can see all the YouTube films of a full online salon. And you see people like S.J. Watson, Dolly Alderton, and many more exclusive and brilliant salons for only a fiver. So that's a great virtual stocking filler. So do please join me next week on my Facebook Live when I'll be talking about Christmas stories. And thanks so much for joining me tonight. It's been lovely to talk about snowy stories. And as I said earlier, I'd love you to tell me about any books that you think I've missed out, which I'm sure there are many, which are fabulous snowy novels. Thanks for joining me, and see you next time. Good night.